Hello everyone, welcome to the third episode of Lily's Little Life Corner. Today, if you are watching the video version, you can see I'm in a different location. I'm actually in my room, not in the library where I normally film. That's because I've just been having so much anxiety, and also I'm very tired and very sleepy. So yeah, I just decided to just stay home and film here. But anyway, in today's episode, we will be discussing a Redditor's dad who is incredibly passive. And the question we will be asking is, why is this Redditor's dad so passive? Or why is this Reddit father so passive? I haven't decided on the title, but one of those things. I came across this Reddit story through Scaling Stories, which is a TikTok account that reads Reddit stories, and they include all of the updates. And I got interested in this story because I think there's a lot of lessons to learn from this father. There's definitely a lot of lessons to learn, and it kind of ties into last week's episode of how manipulation really can change everything about you and everything that you thought you knew. And it will also tie into next week's episode, which is also going to be another Reddit story, which is also kind of about how children are raised can influence their decision making when seeking out a relationship. So yeah. I'm going to use a little pen, which I have not used before for my episodes, but I'm just going to use my pen to just kind of mark off like things that I've been saying. So if you hear a little, that is the pen. I'm going to try and block out those noises though, so hopefully you don't hear them too much. But anyway, let's get into it. So we have an incredibly passive dad who has harmed his son, and his son is the Redditor that we be discussing today. The username of this Redditor is artistic-minute-4365, and this post was submitted to the AITAH subreddit about a month ago. And the AITAH is Am I the Asshole? But it's a little bit different. So the bio or the kind of information says, this is a community like r/Am I the Asshole, except unlike that subreddit, here you can post interpersonal conflicts, anything that's AITA but is not allowed there, even posting about Scar from the Lion King and trying to convince Redditors that he was not the AH. Rules, don't berate others, and no pornography. We have children here. So that is the bio of the subreddit. So it's slightly different. That's why it has a different name. But anyway, let's get into it. So I'm going to read you guys the post, and I'm going to read you guys the update, and then we will kind of discuss this. But I do want to put up a little bit of some disclaimers like I tend to do at the beginning of my podcast episodes. First disclaimer is this, my kind of analysis of this is not at all to dismiss Artistic Minute's trauma. By the post, he is very clearly traumatized by everything that his parents put him through. And so I don't want to dismiss that. I don't want to kind of undersell it. I don't want to say, oh, he's just being dramatic. I don't want to say, oh, he should like excuse his father, he should forgive his father, and none of that, because it's been a very hard life from what I've been able to read. And I know from experience that when your parents kind of dismiss your pain, and when you're kind of telling your parents, hey, this hurts me, and they're kind of just like, whatever, you know, it does hurt. So for this particular episode, my goal is to hopefully make like potential parents that act like this realize the kind of hurt that they're putting their children through, and hopefully they get help earlier than this OP's dad. Because OP's dad, from what I've read in the update, has still not gotten help. So hopefully if any parents that are acting like this dad see themselves in this, hopefully they are able to understand their behavior, understand that it is very harmful to specifically their children, and hopefully they are able to better themselves. But if not, hopefully this podcast episode still helps those children of those kinds of parents. And hopefully I can give you guys advice or strategies like coping mechanisms, or maybe even just support, right? And tell you guys, like, I'm here for you. If you need to rant in the comments, you can. But also, as always, I am going to be discussing this through an armchair psychology perspective, which means that I am not a licensed psychologist. I am just a psychology enthusiast. So, take anything I say with a grain of salt. This is just kind of little tidbits of psychology that I've learned, and I'm kind of inputting it into what I think may be happening. Also, just to remind you guys that you can listen to this in podcast form, either on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So, if you are on the go and you're like, I really don't want to miss this episode, you can absolutely listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. The link will be in the description of the YouTube video. And then also the link for this Reddit post and the update will be available in the description of the YouTube video and the show notes for the podcast platforms. Okay, so let's get into it. There's one other thing that I do want to discuss just a little bit, and that is that OP uses the phrase AP, right? And that means affair partners. So I just wanted to let you guys know that that's what that means. But without further ado, without further disclaimer, I'm going to get into it. Okay, so this post is titled AITAH for losing it and calling my father a weak, pathetic man in front of his family. My father has always been against any confrontation or arguments. He is extremely passive, refuses to stand up for himself, and avoids any conflict. If someone isn't paying attention while walking and bumps into him, he insists it's his own fault. If his employer would mess up his salary, and he wouldn't bother fixing it. If a mechanic didn't properly repair his car, he would just accept it as is. This unfortunately resulted in a tumultuous childhood with my insanely narcissistic mother. She controlled his every move. She got him to quit his job and be a locked-in, stay-at-home dad. She had him do every chore. She insulted him at every step. She cheated on him relentlessly and even brought APs, or affair partners, into our home. She enjoyed making his life miserable every day, and he never questioned it. My extended family, God bless them, were there for me so many times, as much as they could. They tried for years to make my father leave, but he never budged. When she would direct her anger onto myself in the form of screaming, insulting, or general demeaning, my father never once found the guts to stand up for me or support me. When I was a kid, if I cried to my dad about something my mom did or said to me, he would sweep it under the rug, or just insist I forget about it. Hell, he would even try and justify it. As I grew older, it really set in for me how messed up this was. My mother gladly kicked me out of the house when I was 18, and my father just sat there and looked sullen. Didn't say a damn thing. I joined the Air Force almost immediately and got stationed on the other side of the country. The dynamic was awful, and I could have easily gone down the incel route if not for therapy and the amazing people I met along the way. It took years for me to get in a better mental space. I was filled with hatred. My mother left my father 2 years after I got stationed and utterly destroyed my father into the divorce. She was killed a year later in a DUI with one of her APs. I took a lot of joy in hearing that it took her hours to die, and that's when I really knew I needed help to process things. I'm almost 30 now, have a girlfriend who is perhaps the best thing to ever happen in my life, and fully understands the situation with my family. I have learned to not allow myself to be consumed with anger and resentment by my past, or so I thought, you'll see, and instead put that energy to my future. I have been extraordinarily low contact / near no contact with my father since I left. As much as I try, I cannot make that connection with him. I recently went to a family reunion and brought my girlfriend with me. My father was there as it was his side of the family. They have had many issues with him, but he is family, so whatever, I guess. I made sure to avoid him. I was chatting with my uncles when I heard my father talk in the background. He was discussing how a coworker of his was going through a divorce as he discovered his wife was having an affair and was positioned to have a very favorable divorce on his side. My father remarked how his coworker should work instead to forgive his wife and, by his own words, set a good example for unity and forgiveness, and how he believed he set a great example for me in that extent. I swear it was like a switch went off in my head and I was mentally back to the rage-filled 18-year-old. All those years, and he never learned a damn thing. I turned to him and asked if he was fucking serious. He looked at me and started to stutter. I know the next minute was pure word vomit and I can't replay it perfectly, but to sum it up, I shouted how he was a pathetic father, pathetic man. His family all know he's a disgrace of a human being who would rather his son be treated like shit than defend him because he's a fucking coward. No one would ever see him as an example to live by. His wife would rather fuck half the neighborhood than even touch him, and he should never ever believe anyone respects him. I began to derail and ramble between my shouting and my girlfriend quickly took me out and drove me home. It was insane just how quickly being away from him made me feel better. She just held me when we got back and told me it's okay. Again, best thing to ever happen to me. I was ashamed of how I lost it, and I'm now going to resume my therapy. That's a given. However, I'm glad I finally unloaded what always needed to be said onto him. Extended family is pretty mixed with reactions. His brothers / my uncles said it was time for him to hear it from me. My grandparents are pissed I did that in front of the entire extended family, with some saying I should have done that behind closed doors instead of everyone. Okay, so that is the main post, or the first post, right? And some of the comments are on his side, some of the comments are not on his side. It's a very mixed bag, but let me read the update before I get into my opinions. So this says, update AITAH for losing it and calling my father a weak, pathetic man in front of his family. Artistic Minute says, thanks for the advice and recommendations, even amongst some of the YTA. However, some of them needed to be addressed because they were either hilarious or cringeworthy. Some of them were very angry and they kind of confused me at first until I saw their comments further down or saw their profile and saw rants about double standards or complete non sequitur ramblings about women. So yeah, not helpful advice, and they were great dark reflections about how I could have turned out if not for the support in my life. 2, someone attempted to portray my dad as a humble, kind, caring, sensitive old man who I'm just being a big bully to. This was a very good insight into how enablers of abuse get away with so much in today's world, because so many people forget how they are part of the abuse themselves. I agree. 3, some were attempting to mentally dissect me or have a gotcha moment with me to pull apart my story. That was generally asinine, and I had to step away from those before they asked for my cranial measurements or something. Then on the actual update, he goes on to say, so it was pretty much immediately when I was up the next morning that I realized I needed to resolve the events of last night. I first spoke to my girlfriend and gave a sincere apology to her for having her see me like that. She reassured me that nothing was wrong. She'd known me for years and has always known me to be level-headed and understands why I kind of snapped. She herself has a history of dealing with narcissistic families, so she absolutely understands the dynamic. She only really told me that it would be best to work on spending time around my extended family since my father will always be there. I told her, don't worry, I'm immediately going to talk to them afterwards to figure that out. So that part's fine. Looked like kind of an ass in front of her, but I'm making sure that doesn't happen again. I also informed her of my intentions to resume more therapy just to keep myself steady, which she was happy to hear. I called my grandparents and sincerely apologized as well for putting such a sore dent into their family reunion, that it wasn't appropriate, and while I still feel it felt good to say that to him, it should have been privately and not in front of everyone. I also told them that going forward, as much as I love spending time with them, since the family always hangs out in one group that my father will always be in, for now until I can handle being around him, I need to distance myself occasionally until I feel comfortable interacting. I told them that I am, nor would I ever, be establishing an ultimatum or demands of them, and that either way I need to step back. There's a garbage truck going by, so I'm sorry if you can hear it in the background, but I don't think you will, because in last week's episode there was heavy rain and you couldn't hear that either. I think I'm just gonna wait for it to pass. This is what I get for not filming in the library. I guess during my apology and explanation, I was kind of just going on a tangent because my grandfather interrupted me to calm down. He told me that after I left, people kind of separated or slowly started leaving, and that they eventually were able to talk to my father one-on-one. I guess seeing me have such a freak out resulted in my grandmother having a mini freak out of her own when she started talking to my father, resulting in her kicking him out. While I have a great relationship with both, my grandmother has always been extra protective of me, so seeing me that way must have set off a fire in her. My grandfather then said that it has become a bit of an open family secret my father's failing. His brothers taught him about it and generally don't have a great relationship with him, and for my grandparents it's always just uneasy, but seeing me the other day and how it still affects me so much has really, I'm assuming he meant has really set in for a lot of people that it was really bad. They began to try and say sorry if they didn't do enough, which I very adamantly reassured that they did more than what anyone could have expected. It was very emotional for a minute, but culminated in them telling me that they have decided to distance themselves from my father for the time being, and have given him the ultimatum that unless he has a deep introspective and regularly goes to therapy, that distance may become permanent. There's a few typos in this update, so I'm sorry if it sounds a little bit weird. I'm trying my best to kind of correct as I go, but let me keep going. My extended family, I've been told, are going to try and reach out or call or whatever, but I asked them if they could relate to them that it's not necessary and that I'm fine, and I'm sorry to them as well for ruining the day, which again they told me I shouldn't apologize for being hurt. Since then, extended family have sent some messages with the general consensus that it's okay with some older members complaining about my lack of respect towards my father. I don't know what that means, I'm going to be really honest. And finally, I texted my father, hoping to meet out at a local coffee shop and have a final talk. I met him and he didn't look good. I think his parents tearing into him finally got the message through. I had so many things that I could have said, but instead I asked him if the coworker he gave the advice to took it well. He just said that neither him nor several coworkers interact with him anymore. I asked him if he truly 100% believes that every single thing he did for me as a child was for my benefit. He didn't really say anything. I then finally asked if he has any regrets for how I was treated as a child and if he thinks he ever did anything wrong. He looked utterly defeated and just mumbled that he could have done more. I could have poked and prodded and could have gone on another rant, but instead I told him that this should be goodbye and I hope he gets the help he needs. I think finally unloading my frustrations was what I needed to finally be able to move on and find peace. I absolutely needed to keep on track for therapy and admit that a public bitching moment isn't okay, but I should be fine. So a lot of the comments in this update wasn't as widely seen as the first post, but a lot of the comments under here are, kind of congratulating OP for being able to meet with his father and kind of, lay everything out and also take responsibility for the actions, right? But I kind of want to go through some pointers that we can pick up on kind of as OP is telling his story. So the very first thing that kind of caught my eye was in the first post when OP says, "This unfortunately resulted in a tumultuous childhood with my insanely narcissistic mother. She controlled his every move, got him to quit his job, be a locked-in stay-at-home dad, had him do every chore, cheated on him, brought affair partners into the home, and he never questioned it." To me, this just tells me that the dad has some sort of childhood trauma. I don't want to, say anything because from the looks of it, OP's extended family, so uncles, grandparents, they all seem well put together. I don't know if that is the correct phrasing, but essentially, they don't seem like the kind of people that would give OP's dad childhood trauma, right? So I don't want to say childhood trauma from the family, but kind of let me explain what I kind of mean. So typically, people don't really seek out relationships with narcissistic people unless that's what they're used to, right? So in general, people don't seek out these kind of exciting relationships. And let me explain what I mean by exciting, because depending on the gender and depending on your experience with relationships, you might think differently based on what I mean by exciting. But typically, when men hear that a relationship or their relationship is exciting, they think it's a compliment. They think, oh, I'm an exciting person. But typically, when women hear that a relationship or their relationship is exciting, they don't really think that's a compliment. They think, oh, that's a bit of a red flag. And this is because women are typically at the unfortunate end of such an exciting relationship where typically an exciting, quote unquote exciting partner was unpredictable. And that's kind of how I'm using the word exciting. And that's kind of how I'm using the word exciting in this context. I'm using it as unpredictable or as unstable, right? That's what I mean by exciting. So in these quote unquote exciting relationships, there's very high highs and very, very low lows, right? And so just in general, I'm not saying this is what happened to OP's dad, but in general, an exciting or an unstable relationship, the high highs can include things like love bombing, treating you like you're the only person in the world, treating you like you saved them from something, treating you like you saved them from their crazy ex, treating you like you are better than their crazy ex. I gotta wait for the garbage truck to pass once more. This is the recycling truck, actually. So obviously the high highs can include things like love bombing and all that stuff, but the low lows can include berating you, giving you the cold shoulder, hitting you, telling you that you are the worst thing to ever happen to them, taking money from you, telling you that you just can't be trusted with anything, things like that. So in general, a normal person with a normal or a healthy upbringing does not seek out unstable relationships, right? And again, this isn't to say that OP's dad's family gave OP's dad an unstable upbringing, but these kinds of people, you're kidding. There's another garbage truck. Just as the garbage truck is passing by, I was filming a TikTok doing my makeup and my makeup was just going horribly, right? And I was telling my TikTok followers, maybe this is a sign that I should just not film this podcast. But also, like, I was telling them, like, I'm in a bit of a dilemma because if I film this podcast right now, like, maybe the universe is like telling me don't film this podcast. But if I don't film this podcast today, I don't also want to film it tomorrow because tomorrow's my birthday, you know? And so if I film it Wednesday, like, I'll only have Thursday to edit it, and I want to get it up before Friday so that I can schedule it, and it's just a whole dilemma. But I'm pushing through. It's just a bit annoying. So anyway, continuing on. This window is not soundproof. Okay, moving on. So like I'm saying, I'm not saying that OP's dad's parents gave OP's dad an unstable upbringing, but somewhere along OP's dad's childhood or even teenagehood, he kind of grew up with the idea that this kind of relationship was normal and it was something that he should seek out, if that makes sense. And this kind of goes along with what I'm saying right now, but typically those who seek out tumultuous relationships either had their first ever relationship when they were very, very young be a tumultuous relationship where, because their relationship was quote unquote exciting, they felt like this is something that I should achieve. The highs feel so, so good. But every relationship goes through struggles, right? And so they kind of justify it in their heads, like, this is what I should achieve, this is something that I should seek out because the highs feel really, really good, and that's what feels like true love, so I'm going to continue seeking out these kinds of relationships. Other types of people who seek out these exciting relationships are people who grew up in an unstable household, like I said. I don't think this applies to OP's dad, but if it applies to you, and if you're kind of wondering, like, why do I always seem to attract these kinds of people, maybe it's because you grew up in an unstable household where you were love bombed by your parents so that they could convince you to do something that you didn't want to do, but then when you did that something that you didn't really want to do and they were able to successfully convince you, then they go back to treating you like you're shit, right? Or maybe even they didn't even get to love bomb you, maybe they even just treated you like shit, and so you were kind of pushed into a kind of a narcissistic den, right? Where you attracted all sorts of narcissists, and your friends, your first love, were also narcissists that also gave you the cold shoulder when you did something wrong. And so you would do anything in your power to get their love back, including forgiving some of their more unforgivable mistakes. The point is that when you're young, something happens to you where your self-esteem just gets absolutely and utterly destroyed, right? And it's something that you can't really fix because it's something that you've learned, something that has, I shouldn't say you can't really fix, I should say more, you don't know that you need to fix it because to you, this is your normal. This is like your normal everyday thing. You don't think that there's anything wrong with you. You don't think that there's anything that you should change about yourself, etc. So it's kind of like you're kind of stuck in this limbo where you're like, the highs of my relationship, when I'm being love bombed, those feel so, so good. But the lows feel so, so terrible. But you don't know anything different, so you don't know that you should get out of that. You don't know that you should fix the cycle. Bose from Bose versus the World talks about this, and she explains how when she finally had a stable relationship, a safe relationship, she explains how her partner was kind of being really nice to her. And because in the past she had had so many unstable relationships, someone being nice to her was kind of like a trigger. And I talked about this in my very first podcast episode, the one with my own mom, and how I say that sometimes, you know, the smallest things, such as a compliment, can trigger you because a compliment means that someone's trying to get you to do something. You know, a compliment can mean that someone is trying to get you to do something that you don't really agree with. And that's kind of what happens in these unstable relationships, where when you get a compliment, you kind of subconsciously know that the love bombing is going to come. So you're kind of preparing yourself, right? And you're getting ready to put up that shield, like I explained in the Mayo Mom episode. And so when she had her stable relationship, she would get a compliment and she would kind of think, okay, like, what do you want from me? Like, why are you giving me this compliment? What do you want me to do for you? And her partner would kind of be like, what do you mean? Like, I'm just telling you, you look good. Like, what do you mean? You know? And so that kind of stable relationship, when you have come out of a very kind of exciting cycle where every single one of your partners are very exciting, and then you go into a stable relationship and it feels very safe and very not exciting, and you don't feel these high highs where you're like, wow, we are so in love, it's us against the world kind of mentality, and you don't have these low lows that kind of make the high highs feel worth it. I should say, when you're not going through these low lows that feel worth it to go through, because you've been so like brainwashed into thinking you just have to go through the low lows to get to the high highs, right? And then the low lows will be worth it, that kind of thing. When you get into a stable relationship, you're kind of thinking, I'm missing something. This relationship is weird. It's not normal. But it is normal. That's how it should be. Except for you're not having... There's another garbage truck. Except for you're not having to kind of fight for that love, right? Like you used to. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. You're not having to fight for the high highs. And so then you start doubting yourself and you start doubting, like, do I actually love this person? Am I actually in love with this person? Does this person actually love me? Because we're not going through these struggles together, right? He's not or she's not putting me through the low lows. They're not giving me the cold shoulder. They're not making me fight for their love. So does that actually mean that I love them, right? And so then you kind of go back into the cycle of having these exciting relationships. And to me, that feels like what happened to OP's dad, right? And it was kind of this, just this cycle of relationships that taught him that he just needs to wait through the bad so that he can get to the good. And so thus not only his self-esteem was destroyed, but he also learned that you don't need to fight back. The good will come naturally, right? But he didn't learn that the good would be there if he didn't go through the bad. Does that make sense? Because it's not normal to have to fight for someone to love you, but he didn't learn that. I don't know if I'm making any sense. Please let me know if I'm making sense. But anyway, there's a couple of other ways to develop these kinds of tendencies. For example, if your home life was really, really great, but if you had friends who kind of told you, oh, you're standing up for yourself, that's really uncool, we're not going to be your friend anymore, right? That kind of mentality can also affect you. And so that's kind of what I mean by, I don't think it was OP's dad's family that made him this way. I think it must have been some other outside source that made him this way. But anyway, all of these situations can lead to someone who was taught that standing up for themselves is bad. It's not good. If you stand up for yourself, you're going to get even more punished, right? So maybe it was, in general, kind of speaking in general, maybe it was a narcissistic parent, right, that told them, oh, you're fighting back against my unfair treatment, well, I'm gonna smack you with a belt, right? Kind of like my family. Again, I talked about this in my Mayo Mom episode, but my grandma was a very harsh woman, right? And she was kind of one of those women that taught my aunts and uncles and my mom that they needed to fight for themselves. They needed to fight to survive, when that wasn't really the case necessarily. It was just that she was an interesting woman. We'll just put it that way. But yeah, so maybe it's like a parent telling them, you hate when I smack you around, you hate when I embarrass you, well, too bad, I'm going to continue doing that, right? Abusive parents. And so then from childhood, you kind of thought, oh, if I defend myself, I'll only get punished more. I'm being punished for something that I didn't do, but if I tell them I'm being punished for something I didn't do, they're going to punish me even more for speaking up or for talking back to them. It can also be your first love, right? Insulting you, maybe they're cheating on you, and when you call them out, they're like, what do you mean? Like, this is normal. I still love you, but I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, right? I'm going to cheat on you. I'm going to treat you badly. Or maybe it was your first love telling you, I'm only hitting you because I care about you, right? Kind of like what I talked about in my New Jeans episodes. I'm only fat shaming you because I care about you, that kind of thing. Also, maybe it was a friend group, right? Maybe you were kind of a loner in high school, and so you became friends with some very unsavory people because you were in a vulnerable place, and they started telling you, you need to bully this person, and if you don't do it, we're going to bully you, and you're going to be uncool and you're going to go back to being a loner and a weirdo. If you hang out with us, you're not going to be a loner or a weirdo. You're going to be the cool kid. But if you don't do this, you won't get to hang out with us anymore and you'll go back to being the loner and the weirdo. So you'd better do what we're telling you to do, right? And if you fight back against them, they're like, oh, you don't want to be our friend anymore? Well, fuck you, you know? It's a bunch of different things that can make a person be this way, that can ruin a person's self-esteem. It can even be being bullied in high school. It can even be a bunch of different things. But typically, when someone's self-esteem is ruined to the point that OP's dad's self-esteem has been ruined, it's because something really, really close to OP's dad happened. That's why I'm saying, like, it was either his first love, it was either his friend group, or it was either his family. But again, I don't really believe that it was his family just because of how OP's dad's family treats OP, if that makes sense. Like, to me, in my mind, if narcissists had raised OP's dad, they then wouldn't change their narcissistic ways to treat OP better. There could be some narcissists out there. In fact, I think there are narcissists out there that, you know, do things better. For example, narcissistic grandparents who treat their grandchildren better than they ever taught their children, or that they ever treated their children, so that their grandchildren go against their parents. Does that make sense? But I don't think that this is the case, but it could be, right? It could be that OP's dad's parents told him, oh wow, you're worthless. Maybe he was the black sheep of the family and he was told, you're worthless, you're this and that, your brothers are so much better. It is interesting that OP's dad's brothers or OP's uncles kind of started making fun of OP's dad for being a quote unquote failure. So maybe that is something that, you know, but I think because OP's dad is so just passive, in my opinion, I think it was a mix of things. I think he had to have had a combination of things. So maybe it was a friend and his first love. Maybe it was a teacher and his first love. Maybe it was a teacher and his friend group. Maybe it was a teacher and his parents. Maybe it was his parents and his friends. Maybe it was, you know, his brothers and bullies in high school or bullies in school. We don't know because OP, as far as I know, has not updated or answered any of these kinds of questions, but I am curious to know. Like, where did he learn that this was a normal thing? But it is, you know, important to know. I'm kind of like working through this situation to know that I am telling you guys that these kinds of behaviors are learned. Like, you learn that this is normal because someone teaches you that this is normal, right? Someone teaches you that it's normal to not stand up for yourself. It's normal to not defend yourself. When it's not normal, and if someone has told you don't stand up for yourself, don't defend yourself, you have to know it's not normal. You do need to stand up for yourself. You do need to defend yourself. And it happens to a lot of people, right? And you know what? I'm gonna throw out another possibility. And that is that maybe OP's dad in his life did not have any kind of situation where he needed to stand up for himself, right? Maybe he was just kind of like whatever he asked for, he was given kind of thing. And so he never really needed to think, I need to stand up for myself, right? And so when he met his future wife and she started telling him, like, no, this is how things work, he didn't really have a foundation to stand up on and say, is that actually how that works? Like, are you sure? Right? That's kind of what I'm going to talk about in my next podcast episode, is like sometimes kids will grow up with these parents that love them, obviously, and show them a lot of love, but they don't prepare them for the real world, because in their showcase of love, they kind of accidentally teach their children to accept love bombing. And the next episode is very, very interesting, and I'm very, very excited to kind of go through it and get your guys' opinions on what you guys think might be happening. But yeah, sometimes children are taught kind of accidentally by their parents that love bombing is okay. So then they seek out relationships where they are being love bombed, except they're not expecting that after the love bomb comes the manipulation, the berating, the making you feel like you're not worth it, the, all this other stuff that usually lows in relationships entail. But then they get love bombed again. So then they're like, oh, this is normal. And the parents are accidentally setting their kids up for abusive relationships. And that might be also, but again, we don't know because OP has not updated. So I'm just throwing out around ideas. But you guys let me know what you think. So kind of like what I was saying before, these behaviors are learned at a very young age. They're learned when you are still kind of a sponge and you are kind of absorbing everything. So when this kind of thing happens to you, you think that this is normal. But it is very, very important, crucial to address these kinds of behaviors and these kinds of misconceptions before you ever think of having kids. Because if you have kids, you will start telling your kids, this is normal. This is a normal relationship, right? Whether it be because of your current relationship and your kids are watching that dynamic and they're learning that that dynamic is normal because that dynamic is the dynamic that they grew up with, or whether it's because, maybe you've split from your abusive partner, but then you try and get yourself into a stable relationship and you just can't find the groove because you think this is not normal, this is not what I was taught. So then you go back through the abusive relationships and your children are kind of seeing that and you're telling your children abusive relationships are normal. And this to me, like OP's dad kind of tried to convince OP this is normal, this is fine. Like for example, when OP says, when she would direct her anger onto myself in the form of screaming, insulting, or general demeaning, my father never once found the guts to stand up for me or support me. When I was a kid, if I cried to dad about something mom did or said to me, he would sweep it under the rug or just insist I forget about it. Hell, he would even try and justify it. And so we can see, obviously, OP's dad did not address these behaviors at all, and he started trying to convince OP this is normal. Like, this is fine. Your mom is just looking out for you. Your mom just wants the best for you. That's why she's screaming at you. That's why she's insulting you. That's why she's, being not a great mom to you. It's because she loves you. And that's not normal. That's not the case. No one should ever insult you and then say, I'm only insulting you because I love you. That's not true. If they loved you, they would not be insulting you. At least not on purpose, right? Because there's sometimes where people insult you on accident. And they don't really know that they've insulted you, that kind of thing. But in general, if someone insults you, they don't love you, right? And don't allow them to say, I'm only insulting you because I love you. So yeah, as we can see, OP's dad started trying to kind of inflict this sort of behavior onto OP and started trying to normalize OP's mom's behavior and his own behavior of, well, what do you mean? Like, you want me to stand up for you? But why? Like, your mom just is your mom. You just have to accept it, right? And we can later see in the post where OP himself admits that he would have gone down the incel route. And for those of you who don't know, incels, it stands for involuntarily celibate, right? And it's basically a group of men, group of young boys, more so nowadays because young boys are also getting swept into this idea that there's like a hierarchy of relationships, and if you don't look a certain way, you'll never get any bitches, and if you don't get any bitches, you have to take it by force, that kind of stuff. But this group of men, this is what incels claim is gonna happen. If you become a weak or a beta man and you fall prey to alpha women, you'll be just manipulated. The alpha woman will take advantage of you, and women are just evil and they want to suck the life out of you and that kind of thing. And it's this childhood is kind of like incel's wet dream. This is what, if you go on the incel website, and which I do not recommend that you go to the incel website, especially not like interacting with them. I think it's very dangerous. But if you go onto the incel website or any incel spaces, you will see like this is what they are warning other men of. This is why they're saying don't ever get into a relationship with a woman. If you want sex, just take it by force. It's not worth it to blah 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 blah, right? And it just devolves into insanity. Truly. So yeah, I can absolutely see how OP as a young teenage boy would have gotten on the internet and would have been sucked into these incel spaces and would have seen, oh, other women do this? Well, every woman sucks. Every woman is a bitch. every woman is XYZ, right? But, you know, he says, like, I would have gone down the incel route had it not been for the amazing people that I met along the way, just kind of as he grew up. I also think it's worth, this is gonna have to go in a blooper compilation, guys. This is insane how much noise is going on in my house right now and around my house. I don't know what's going on. But I also find it interesting. What is going on? Actually, you need to call my mom. Guys, she's remodeling. What the hell? I think it's worth noting that when OP's dad was kind of talking and having that conversation about his coworker, he said like something along the lines of like, yeah, I set a good example for my son to create like unity and forgiveness in a couple, right? To me personally, that shows like a deep level of brainwashing that can only be achieved with heavy manipulation. But, you know, again, this is not to excuse OP's dad's behavior, because OP's dad's behavior is still very, very shitty, and he is an abuse enabler. Like, there's no other way around it. There's no other way to say, like, whatever. I think he is an abuse enabler. But I also just find the whole story very, very interesting. It's a very interesting pipeline, and I want to know what you guys think based off of what I've read to you so far, based on, you know, the post. Regardless, I think it's very telling how destroying someone's self-esteem can then lead to that person ruining someone else's life or self-esteem, right? Because they've learned that these behaviors are very normal, and so then they go on to inflict that kind of behavior onto other people, whether that be their friends, whether that be their children, whatever the case may be. Maybe it's younger siblings, you know, and the younger siblings look up to them, and this person whose self-esteem has been ruined then goes on to ruin their younger sibling's self-esteem, whatever the case may be. But anyway, I think just to kind of wrap this whole thing up, I think it's important for OP to understand the why behind the dad's behavior, right? Maybe he should like sit down with his family and say, okay, what happened in my dad's childhood to make him this way? Were you guys mean to him? Did you guys bully him? I think if he starts to go down kind of the path that his dad went down, he will be able to see maybe there's some behaviors that he doesn't think that OP, or just a minute, doesn't think are bad, but then he sees those same behaviors in his dad's earlier behavior, and he kind of sees, I think it's important to visualize the timeline and this pipeline, right? Because there's very real pipelines that you go down, and it only takes one instant, one thing. Maybe it's believing that you should accommodate people, right? Maybe it's believing that you are nice and you accommodate people. And so then you go down this pipeline of, well, if I'm accommodating people, I also have to accommodate this manipulative person. And if I accommodate this manipulative person will take advantage of me. And I will let them take advantage of me because I initially believe that I need to accommodate whoever, right? I'm a nice person. I accommodate people. I don't fight back. I want people to feel comfortable around me. And then people take advantage of that niceness, right? And so I think it's important for OP to see this kind of pipeline that his dad went through and see, kind of pick out some of the behaviors that his dad had throughout this pipeline and see if he can identify behaviors of his dad's pipeline in his own behaviors and his own thought processes. And that will help dismantle OP's kind of own misconceptions that he doesn't even realize are misconceptions. He's just thinking this is just normal. And then when he goes through his dad's kind of pipeline of behavior, he will see, oh, this is not normal. Right? Or maybe even it's just as small as, you know, my dad was a really nice person and he tried to accommodate people and he tried to help everyone around him. I'm also trying to help everyone around him, but what went wrong specifically with my dad, right? Why did he feel the need to accommodate such mean people? And then he can think, okay, this is how I'm going to build up my self-esteem so that I don't end up accommodating a manipulative person that will just, you know, walk all over me. And then if OP decides to have any children with his girlfriend, or maybe even, with someone else, whatever, if OP decides to have children, he can then teach his children, you need to be nice to everyone, but you also need to watch out for those people who are taking advantage of you, and you need to learn how to defend yourself against those who are trying to manipulate you, right? If, and then he can just go through and help dismantle that kind of trauma, if that makes sense. And it'll just help. In my own personal opinion, it's going to help. But you know what? I'm going to go through Artistic Minute's profile, and I'm going to see there's another update. Okay, this update was posted 12 days ago. It says update to AITAH for losing it and calling my father a weak, pathetic man in front of his family. OP says, things have progressed over the last couple weeks and I now have broader context about my family. Long story short, there was a lot hidden from me. My father was an absolute asshole to his family, and that's why they treat him the way they do. Got a lot of feedback, including the compilation post on Best Redditor updates, and one thing that stood out was people questioning if my extended family could have contributed to the abuse, and that's why he was so feeble. And since I was trying to work on my relationship with my family, I figured it was, again, there's a lot of typos, no shade to OP, but there's a lot of typos, and it's making it a little bit hard to read, but let me try again. I'm assuming he means, and since I was trying to work on my relationship with my family, I figured it was time to ask the hard questions before going that far. I met with my dad's brothers, who invited me out to a popular lunch spot. For context and clarity, Dale is the oldest brother. He is married and has a daughter and son. My father is the second oldest, self-explanatory. John is the second youngest and also married with a son. Bill is the youngest, married with 3 daughters. So anyways, we met up and I ripped the band-aid off, asking about my father growing up, what he was like beyond the basics I know, and what really is going on with their relationship. Dale sighed and basically summed up that besides what I know, there's a lot of backstory I'm unfamiliar with that they never told me about because simply it was never the time nor the place to. What I've always known is that my father was fairly normal when he was young, a little shy but fantastic academically, played sports occasionally, had a close-knit relationship with his brothers, and meeting my mom in high school junior year. What did I say? Oh my gosh. Okay. Meeting my mom in junior high school. I read that wrong. Meeting my mom in high school junior year made everything go downhill. What I didn't know was that my father was a guiding figure for his 2 younger brothers and was generally seen as one of the nicest people with a bright future ahead of him. I did not know this when I said what I said. This is the first time I'm reading through this update. Generally seen as one of the nicest people with a bright future ahead of him. My grandparents adored him and he even became a little bit of a golden child, but no one minded. The reason his family doesn't respect him is what happened to his behavior when my mother got attached to him. It first started simple. My mother acted rude and distant to the family. They weren't huge fans, but my father loved her, so they tolerated it. She became possessive and slowly isolated my father and convinced him to give up his ambitions and goals. Family became concerned and spent a long time trying to talk to him and convince him to leave. My father didn't budge and began to lash out. When I was born, my extended family tried to talk to my father about my mother's attitude. My father was angry and threatened to report them for harassment. He was in denial about her behavior. When Dale's wife was having fertility issues, my mother messaged her appalling and cruel things. When Dale was pissed and went to talk to my father, he told Dale to drop it and even justified it. Dale punched him and police almost got involved. Dale hated him going forwards. John grew to hate him when my mother insulted his son due to mild physical disabilities. My father cracked a joke about what she said. John hated him then. Finally, Bill, who always idolized my father, tried to inform my father that my mother made a pass at him and urged divorce. My father responded with a maddening call of utter hate and relationship-ending words. To sum it all up, the more time my father spent with my mother, the more he began to repeat her attitude. When they all, I'm not sure what OP means by this, but it says, when they all signs of abuse to me and tried to intervene, my father threatened to lie, to accuse them of worse things. My mother had money and lawyers and could make their lives hell if they tried, and my father would gladly let her. They were stuck and could only do so much at a time. The oldest members of the family, like the grandparents, great and uncles, and such, believe in the traditional mindset of family sticking together no matter what, while the generations further down want to keep a distance from him. They're all stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's more that they told me. It was all essentially that my father died on the hill for my mom, ruining his relationship with his brothers in the process. And when she died and destroyed him, he probably had to realize it was all for nothing. My grandparents seem to not want to accept the fact that he was lost, or maybe they hope he can fix his life, who knows. This was a large process and was only confirmed by my father himself when he called to ask about family therapy with us. I cut to the chase and asked if what I heard was true. He said yes. I would have agreed to maybe some family therapy, but now I have no idea. Yeah, so this reminds me of the podcast episode that I'm going to do in a week. I'm going to upload that in a week from when this podcast episode is uploaded, right? So next Friday. And it's basically just this, that childhood can kind of prepare you to accept abusive relationships. And I find parenting so interesting because you try and teach your kids to do the right thing and you try to guide your kids the right way, but depending on kind of a few things that maybe you do wrong, you end up leading your child down a very dangerous path, and that is the path of accepting abusers into their life, right? So you teach your child to be nice, but that's it. You teach your child to accommodate other people and to be nice to other people, but you don't teach them that sometimes people will take advantage of that niceness. And you don't teach them that when someone tries to take advantage of that niceness, you have to defend yourself. I guess there's no one way to kind of prepare you for abusive relationships, but it is very interesting. Yeah, I mean, he was a guiding figure for his two younger brothers, was generally seen as one of the nicest people with a bright future ahead of him. You know what this also reminds me of? This also reminds me of when young girls become wrapped up in a criminal life, right? And it's because their first love manipulated them so much that they now believe that this is normal, right? So it doesn't matter how much you try to tell your child, like, you need to be nice, you need to treat others with kindness. As soon as they get someone who gives them kind of outside validation, makes them feel like they are everything in the whole entire world, makes them feel quote unquote loved, they will change. They will forget everything that you taught them. And we have seen this in true crime cases where sometimes young girls become murderers because they were kind of groomed and manipulated into believing that it's totally okay to want to murder people because they don't do what you ask them to, right? And maybe that's a little bit dramatic. Obviously, OP's dad never became a murderer, but it does remind me of that, how, you know, I'm saying, like, there's no one way to teach your child how to avoid manipulative relationships, especially if they fall in love with a manipulator, right? Because a manipulator will manipulate. And if you tell your child, maybe this isn't the right person for you, your child might then go to their manipulator and tell them, yeah, my parents don't think you're a good person for me. And the manipulator will manipulate, and your child will come back to you and they will say, fuck you, right? I don't care about you. I love this person. I'm going to run away with this person. You know, I'm going to join this person. And they forget everything that you ever taught them. So yeah, I think maybe it's not fair of me to say that maybe, you know, OP's dad's family didn't teach him how to avoid manipulative relationships, because sometimes you can teach your children to avoid manipulative relationships, but because the manipulator is so good at manipulating, they will forget those teachings, right? They will forget that you ever taught them X, Y, and Z because someone else is manipulating them and someone else is telling them, your parents are wrong, right? And so if you taught your child be nice to everyone, your child might then go to their manipulator and their manipulator will tell them, you don't have to be nice to everyone. Actually, you have to be mean to everyone, right? And suddenly your child forgets that you ever taught them. And sometimes you can recover from that, but because you learn those things and those behaviors super young, it's very, very hard to come out of it. It is possible, but again, like I said, sometimes you get stuck in that cycle of, you know, sometimes you realize that these kinds of relationships are toxic for you. These kinds of exciting, manipulative relationships are bad for you until you try to get out and you try to get into a normal relationship, but the normal relationship is just not cutting it for you. So you go back into that cycle of, I just want someone who loves me the way that I'm used to being loved, which is manipulation, which is love bombing. And in the process, you hurt a whole bunch of people. And this is also something I forgot to mention in last week's episode, which is sometimes victims of manipulation do need to be held accountable for their actions. And someone said this in the comments of my New Jeans podcast episode. And And that's when I realized, oh, I totally forgot to say this. Yeah, new genes, they have been groomed, they have been manipulated, but they also have hurt many, many people along the way. And many of those people considered them their friend. You know what I mean? Such as Le Seraphim. And so even though new genes have been manipulated, they still need to be held accountable for their actions, right? And so this is kind of what I'm saying with OP's dad. Like, he still needs to be held accountable for his actions. It's sad that he got manipulated so early on, that he had such a fantastic and bright future ahead of him, and he kind of destroyed it all for some girl he met in high school. But manipulative relationships will do that to you. They will absolutely do that to you. And like I said, in the process, you hurt people. And if you are able to come out of that fully and completely, you do need to go back and apologize to those people. And you do need to go back and say, you know what, I'm so sorry. I was manipulated. I know that what I did was wrong, and I completely and totally understand that. And I totally understand why you would hate me. And I hate that I did that, you know? And yeah, I think OP's, I don't know what to think of this story's like kind of validity, because like this subreddit says, like, you can post fake posts. Absolutely. You can post hypothetical posts, right? So this could be a fake or hypothetical post where none of this actually happened. It would just be like, what would happen if X, Y, and Z, right? And what would people say about X, Y, and Z? There have been posts like that as of recent on Reddit where people get on here and they reverse the gender roles, right, of stories, just to kind of measure like double standards and stuff like that. And maybe that's what OP was referring to in his first update. I don't really know, but yeah, but because this subreddit is kind of does allow things like that, I don't know if this is true, but what I do know is that this kind of thing happens where manipulative relationships will change someone so much that like the person that you used to know is no longer there. They might as well have died, right? Because manipulative relationships will do that to you. Like I said in my last podcast episode, the New Jeans one, manipulative relationships, they not only turn your world upside down after you find out that you've been manipulated, they turn your world upside down as you are being manipulated, right? Because a manipulator can tell you, yeah, the sky is not blue. You're dumb for thinking that the sky is blue. The sky is actually green. Are you colorblind? Can you not see that? Right? And they will just inflict all of these tactics that they know, and they will inflict them onto you, and suddenly you're thinking, oh my god, you're so right. I'm so sorry. I am dumb. I'm stupid. That's why I can only trust you. The sky is absolutely green. You're so totally right, right? And you 100% fully believe that. Either way, I think it's very, very, very interesting how things played out. And you guys will have to let me know if you believe the story, if you don't believe the story, what the case may be. You know, let me know what you guys think. But that is kind of all that I have for today. Again, I'm sorry if this podcast episode ended up being very bad. There's just so much noise happening around me. This is why I film in the library, because there's not as much noise going on in the library. But then again, in the library, I can't be as loud as I want to be because it's supposed to be quiet. And if I'm not quiet, people will hear me and it's kind of embarrassing. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of this Reddit story. Let me know what you think of the update, and let me know what you think about my opinions. Do you have a different opinion? Do you agree with my opinions? Just let me know. As always, the script, I use that word loosely because it's not really a script. The script or the notes for this podcast episode will be available on my Patreon, which I will have in the show notes and in the YouTube video description. Yeah, that is it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope this podcast episode ended up not being so confusing and convoluting. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next Friday with that story that I'm very excited to read to you guys, and I'm very excited to get your opinions on that as well. But yeah, till then, bye!